let's take another trip on the Infinity Train. So, I have now seen the second season of this wonderfully weird sci-fi personal growth series. And I really like the first season. This one's also really good and does an impressive job of feeling different enough. Because once I knew before I started, but once I heard that it was kind of an anthology series in that it follows a different lead character each season, I did kind of wonder, like, how are they going to avoid, having basically the same journey just for different people over and over again. And they actually showed in this by multiple layers, they're actually pretty good at keeping it forward. The first is, it's not just some random person that we're primarily following. It is a character that we met in season 1. And her companion character, who is new, his journey is distinctly different from Tulip's. So between his journey being so different from the previous lead and this not truly being just some person who we're meeting for the first time, but like someone who we have already met, it's like, oh, let's see what's going on with them. Yeah, that is a really smart way to move forward an anthology series like this. There's a lot in this that's quite impressive, especially given that a lot of the mystery is gone. A lot of the questions about what is going on, how does it work, what are the rules, a lot of those questions got answered. Not necessarily in super specifics, but to some degree in the previous season. So I wondered, was this going to have a handicap going in? Because that sense of mystery was a big part of the appeal of the first season. This thing doesn't miss a beat. I know some people are going to ask whether I like season 1 or season 2 better. I honestly don't know. I'd have to rewatch both to make a solid call on that. They're both really good. They're both really, really good. So I am going to start talking more openly about what I liked. So if you haven't seen it, I recommend that you do so. Whole season only takes about 2 hours to watch. So it's not taking that much of your time to just catch up and know what I'm talking about. So I recommend you do it. I'm just going to start talking now. So one of my sort of not like big concerns in terms of like, my intellectualizing and analyzing and like my storytelling brain going into work. None of these things worried about this, but in my heart, I was like, am I going to like this as much without Atticus? Because I suspected he wasn't going to show up, and he doesn't. He gets a reference. But I loved him so much. I'm like, is there going to be an Atticus-sized hole in this story in my heart? And you know what? Alan Dracula is a dang good replacement. Again, especially because it's not trying to directly replace Atticus. Alan Dracula is a completely different can of worms, but is still filling the role of the denizen of the train who just is there to help, but is so different from Atticus. And not just with the obvious things like the fact that Alan Dracula doesn't talk, but like, oh my god, this deer is bonkers. And shockingly endearing. Oh god, is that a pun? I don't know. But for a character who doesn't talk and has fairly unreadable expressions, like a real animal, honestly, a real wild animal, you get invested in him, and you get the connection being built between him and I'm gonna call her Lake. I know through most of the story she's referred to as MT, but by the end she has chosen her name. Her name is Lake, and I'm not gonna call her any of the things that she was being called across the rest of the season that she rejects and does not want. So with the bonding with Alan Dracula and Lake and Jesse, like it does read as a genuine bonding on all sides without particularly humanizing the deer, that's really impressive. Nicely done. So I mentioned some concern about the loss of mystery. It actually does a pretty good job of bringing back, especially at the end, that sense of what the heck is going on, and that ominousness, which was another thing that I wondered about, since in the previous case we didn't know really, was the train trying to help them? Was it trying to harm them? Was the conductor benevolent or not? But now, 1-1's back in charge, and we know 1-1. 1-1 isn't perfect and makes mistakes, but we know, and we have some degree of understanding and possibly even trust of 1-1. So I wondered, is that more creeping sense of dread, is that going to be gone? And it wasn't really, for a couple of reasons. The first is the primary threat here becomes the two cops who are tracking down Lake. And they are a good presence. They come up at good times. They're well paced across. I like the difference in the dynamic between them. It's very much a good cop, bad cop situation, without ever forgetting that both the good cop and the bad cop have the same end goal. So while their methods may vary, they're both after the exact same thing and are going to jump at the chance to get it. So that was well done as a threat. But I think more impressively, at least to me, was at the end in the last episode especially, where we see Lake get to the place where the pods are set up and where people are assigned their numbers, and there was a renewed sense of mystery and is this place safe sense to it. And the thing that it made me think of, and not just because it was somewhat visually reminiscent, it was a little, but I think structurally I thought of it a bit like The Matrix. So, when you first find out the world's a simulation, that's a bit, oh, okay. But then when you see, the human battery farm and that thing, it brings in a whole new layer. And I feel like seeing the pods and seeing the people getting processed was a bit like that, bringing in a new layer of, oh, okay, even though we knew to a pretty significant degree what was going on. And like I said, Jesse is a very different character from Tulip. His problems that he's trying to come to terms with and resolve are very different. It's funny, I related a bit more to Jesse in the beginning and a little bit less as we learn more about him. But this is kind of specific to me. And what I mean by that is early on when he's talking about his friends and how, or the swim team, where, he did the butterfly because, well, he was one of the only few who was any good at it. And even though it's not what he really likes to do, he'll do it because it's what the team wanted. And honestly, that I was able to relate to. I don't want to, get too psychoanalytical on myself on this, but, broadly speaking, I'm a flexible enough person that if a collective group, or if me and another individual, if we want something that is not quite the same thing, but what they want is something I'm okay with, it wouldn't be my preference, but I'm okay with that, I'll tend to kowtow. Or historically I have. I actually think I've gotten better about that, about stating my own preferences, and in general I think I've gotten better with that. But I really did relate to that idea of okay, well, I'll just do this because it'll make you folks happy. Unfortunately, it distanced me a little bit when we got a little bit more into it, and we saw the flashback with his younger brother Nate, and it became a bit more, frankly, a stereotypical peer pressure bullying situation, which is the kind of thing that you see depicted a lot in media, especially kids media. And if that is reflective of other people's life experience, okay. But for me as a viewer, that kind of thing I find distancing, because I never personally in my life experienced the peer pressure like that. The very blatant, that's clearly what's happening. Peer pressure is something that I have to look back in my life and go, oh yeah, I did give into that, because it was never as obvious as that flashback scene. So when that happened, it did actually distance me from him as a character a little bit. But overall, in terms of what his issue is, just his personality, just how upbeat he is most of the time, yeah, I dug that. And that gave him a very contrasting energy versus Lake. And that that gave them a good rapport between the two of them. It was nice having some recurring characters like One, who I still kind of adore. Seeing the cat come back, that was kind of entertaining. I feel like the show is trying to position the cat as like, ooh, fan favorite character, and I don't know if she is. And I like her fine, but I'm not like, oh, yay, the cat. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. There's a cat. Nice. But again, just so much inventiveness on display in this. Between things like the family tree. What wonderfully bonkers. Alan Dracula himself. And it was actually quite interesting seeing this whole sort of Lost Boys concept with Grace and all these other passengers who just said to hell with it and they're playing their own game, basically, rather than doing what the train wants them to do. And I suspected, and I did check to confirm, I suspected after that episode, I bet you Grace is the primary character in the next season. And I avoided spoilers, but I did look it up. I'm like, yeah, she is. I'm like, And that's a good pick. Because much like how Lake had a good highlight episode and then went off to have her own story in the first season, that's kind of what they're doing with Grace here. And again, that's a really good way to set up your future protagonist. And I just like the way this thing unfolds. And again, it sets up a character who's going to be different from the other protagonists so far. Because, Tulip, at this point, we kind of realize is basically like the standard passenger on the train. And then Lake is a denizen of the train. She's not supposed to be able to get off. So that's a whole other thing. And then you have someone like Grace who is a passenger but is so harshly rejecting what she's supposed to do that she's a completely different kettle of worms. Kettle of worms? Can of worms. It's kettle of fish or can of worms. I don't know why but completely different situation from Tulip. So again, it's doing a really good job with these things and picking out things. There is part of me that I have slightly mixed feelings on the very ending because it does something that in general I like, but in this particular situation there are a few So at the end, Lake is able to get off the train and into the quote-unquote real world with Jesse. And that's great. And as far as structurally, I don't need a ton after that. I just need to know that she gets to live her own life now and escape from what she was trying to escape from. And normally that would be more than enough for me. I'd be perfectly happy with that. In this case, it felt like a slightly premature ending because, well, she's made of chrome and has no birth certificate, social security card, history, family. There's so many questions about, well, how does she even live in this world that I did something that was so rare for me, which is I kind of need some of these questions answered before we end, and they didn't. Now, that said, that it's not impossible for them to find ways to hint at how that ended up working out in a later season. I kind of hope they do. And like I said, I don't usually get hung up on logistical questions, but in this case, there's just so many. I'm kind of like, answering a couple of those would be not, I was half expecting that she would unchrome, she would turn flesh in the real world, because that would obviously simplify the situation, but that doesn't happen. And I kind of admire the bravery of not having it happen, but now I got questions. Where normally I would not. So that's sort of, like I said, I had a couple of little nitpicky things, but this show, it's so good, it's so inventive, and it's so fun. It's really fantastic, and I am excited to watch more of it. Infinity Train Season 2, what did you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Like, share, and subscribe. All help me out. If you really want to help me out, there's a Patreon. There are rewards for every tier of support, but no pressure on that. We take a relaxed attitude around here, so just come on back next time you need a break.